It was 7:43 on a Tuesday morning when she threw the suitcase onto the bed, clothes scattering like leaves caught in an angry wind. Her perfume, a scent I'd come to love, soft and familiar, suddenly stung, suffocating me. She didn't look at me at first, just zipped the suitcase up fiercely like she was sealing our past inside. Finally, she turned around, eyes cold, face unreadable, and uttered those words I'll never forget. "You'll never find better than me." The silence, after her voice faded, was deafening. My chest tightened, my throat dry, and the room felt smaller, darker, colder. There was no anger in her tone, no rage, just absolute certainty. It wasn't the suitcase or even the words that broke me. It was her indifference. It was like everything we had built together had suddenly become nothing, dust slipping through my fingers. She walked out without another word, leaving the door slightly ajar, an invitation or maybe a cruel challenge. Little did I know she had already made her next move, and the truth waiting just beyond that door would soon prove far worse than I imagined. Stay till the end, because what happens next will change everything. My name's Adam Hartley. I'm 32 years old, living in a modest townhouse just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. It's the kind of place you don't pick because you're chasing dreams, more like somewhere you land when life convinces you to slow down. I manage cybersecurity systems for a mid-sized financial firm, a career I stumbled into by accident but grew to appreciate because it taught me how to spot cracks in the foundation, vulnerabilities people overlook, lessons I wish I'd applied outside the office. I've always valued consistency, honesty, loyalty, maybe to a fault. My dad raised me alone after my mom passed away from cancer when I was 11, teaching me early that reliability is everything. Every evening after work, you'd find me at home, cooking pasta recipes my mother scribbled in a worn-out notebook. I clung to routines because losing them felt like losing parts of her again. Sometimes, when the sauce bubbled quietly on the stove, the faint aroma took me back to our old kitchen, making the empty space at the dinner table just a little less painful. Meeting Claire changed my carefully structured life. She moved into my world 3 years ago, vibrant and spontaneous, filling in the quiet spaces with laughter and life. I was instantly captivated. She seemed like the perfect counterbalance to my careful nature. Claire was a freelance graphic designer, artistic and impulsive, her energy contagious. When she laughed, it felt genuine, pulling me out of my shell and making the world seem less harsh, less lonely. Within 6 months, she moved into my townhouse. The walls suddenly felt warmer, less like an empty shell and more like a real home. Claire and I built something meaningful, or so I thought. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. We spent weekends fixing up the old porch, painting the kitchen walls a deep blue because she insisted it reminded her of the ocean she'd grown up near. I'd never been sentimental about paint colors before, but her excitement made me care. We had routines together. Sunday mornings at a little cafe downtown, evenings binge-watching old comedies she adored. These moments, small and intimate, became my comfort, my safety. But beneath that surface of warmth and shared dreams, there were moments I chose to overlook. Little signals I brushed off because acknowledging them meant risking the delicate peace we built. Claire's moods would shift unexpectedly, becoming distant, almost unreachable. Her phone buzzed late at night, always face down. I ignored it because confronting it felt like inviting disaster. I told myself it was trust, not denial. Maybe deep down I knew better. My townhouse, the home we'd created, became a stage for subtle tensions, conversations that ended abruptly, dinners eaten in silence, laughter that felt forced. Yet I convinced myself every relationship had these cracks. After all, perfection was unrealistic, right? What I didn't realize was how quickly those tiny cracks could spread into chasms. I didn't see that Claire's restless nature, which had initially drawn me in, would soon tear us apart. Even then, I had no idea that the real threat was quietly waiting, hidden in plain sight, close enough to touch our lives without suspicion. If I'd looked closer, maybe I would have seen it coming. Maybe I could have stopped it. But as life kept rolling forward, I stayed focused on the good, the familiar, blind to the betrayal building slowly behind my back, and that blindness would cost me everything. It didn't unravel all at once. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't knock on the door with a warning. It creeps in quietly, wearing the mask of ordinary days. At first, it was the little things. Claire started going to bed before me, which wasn't her usual rhythm. We'd always fallen asleep around the same time, her curled into my side like it was the safest place in the world. But then she started turning in early, claiming she was exhausted from projects or just not feeling well. When I'd climb in next to her, she'd already be on the edge of sleep, or pretending to be. At the time, I told myself I was overthinking it. She began working more hours, or so she said. Her freelance gigs became oddly demanding, pulling her out of the house at strange times. She'd head out in the evening to meet a client, yet she never offered details, names, or locations. I never used to question her independence, and honestly, part of me admired it. But the shift was subtle. Her phone started staying on, silent, and she guarded it more closely than before. That was new. And when I'd ask how a project was going, her answers grew vague, like she was brushing me off. I chalked it up to stress, maybe even burnout. I didn't push. Then there were the financial quirks. I started noticing transfers from our shared account. Nothing massive, but enough to raise an eyebrow. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. I asked once, gently, and she told me it was to cover gaps between client payments. I wanted to believe her. She sounded convincing, and I didn't want to be the guy who didn't support his partner's career, but that conversation lingered in my head for days afterward. There was something clipped in her tone, defensive, like I had crossed a line I didn't know existed. The biggest red flag should have been the landlord. We'd been renting the townhouse for nearly 5 years. Mr. Danner, our landlord, was a quiet guy in his late 40s, rarely talked much unless something needed fixing, lived a few blocks away. He'd drop by once every few months to check on things, always polite, always distant. But suddenly, Claire started mentioning him more often. At first, it was harmless. Oh, I ran into Danner and we chatted for a bit. Or, he might be coming by to look at the gutter. No big deal, until it started happening regularly. Too regularly. One Saturday, I came home early from a conference. Claire hadn't expected me. Her car was in the driveway. Danner's truck was parked 2 houses down. I didn't see anything. No doors open, no suspicious sounds. But my gut twisted, and I remember standing in the kitchen, wondering why I felt like an intruder in my own home. Claire came downstairs a few minutes later, surprised but overly cheerful, saying she'd just been on a call with a client. When I asked about the truck, she said Danner had stopped by to drop off paperwork. She didn't elaborate. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something was wrong. I could feel it. The distance between us had turned into silence, and it wasn't the comfortable kind. I didn't want to admit it then, but I'd started watching her. Not in a paranoid way, but as someone trying to make sense of something that didn't add up. I noticed how she smiled at her phone more often, how her excuses became more rehearsed, and how she never once mentioned renewing the lease even though it was coming up soon. All of it was building towards something. I could feel it pressing in, like a storm you sense in your bones before the sky even changes. And I kept thinking, what else was I missing? It hit me on a Thursday. March 16th, 10:14 a.m. to be exact. I was at work, running routine audits through our internal systems when a bank notification popped up on my phone. Not unusual. I had alerts set for large withdrawals. But this one wasn't for my account. It was a shared email address Claire and I had used when we first moved in together, one we hadn't used in over a year. Somehow, a forgotten sync had linked it to my device. It showed a PayPal notification, $200 transferred to someone named M. Danner. The memo line, just 2 words. Lease settlement. I stared at that screen, my heart thudding in a slow, cold rhythm. Lease settlement? We weren't moving. We hadn't even discussed it. At least I hadn't. I waited until I got home to dig deeper. I opened our filing cabinet, Claire never locked anything, never cared for passwords or combinations. But the folder labeled Lees and Bills was missing. Gone, like it had never been there. That's when I opened my laptop, pulled up our rental history, and started checking the emails from our landlord. Only there were barely any recent ones. Just 2 in the last 6 months, both brief, both strangely vague. But I remembered Claire telling me he'd sent over documents 2 weeks ago. I couldn't ignore it anymore. My instincts weren't just warning me, they were screaming. That night, while Claire was asleep upstairs, I sat in the living room with every account, statement, and email I could find. I traced the last 5 weeks of financial activity, and what I found stripped away every remaining doubt I'd clung to. Claire had been siphoning small amounts out of our shared savings account, $400 here, $650 there, always timed close to when I got paid. It added up to just over $8,100. I found an email she'd sent using her personal address, a lease transfer agreement signed electronically. Not by me, just her and Danner. 2 names on a document I'd never seen. The next morning I confronted her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I just asked, calmly, "Are we moving?" Because I saw a lease transfer and a PayPal receipt. She paused, just for a second too long. Then she exhaled, like she'd been waiting for this moment. "I was going to tell you," she said. "I'm moving out." No emotion, no explanation, just a cold fact delivered like a weather update. "To where?" I asked. That's when she laughed. Soft, almost pitiful. "You don't need to know that, Adam." It was then I noticed her bags were already packed by the hallway. She had planned this. I don't know what broke me more, her leaving or how methodical it was. How long she must have been setting it up step by step right under my nose. She wasn't running away in the heat of an argument. She was executing a transition, a life shift. One that didn't include me. "I guess that's it then?" I asked, barely hearing my own voice. Claire grabbed her coat without answering, and right as she opened the door, she turned back to me. Not with anger, not even smugness, just finality. "You'll never find better than me," she said. "Might as well not even try." And then she was gone. For a moment I stood completely still. No thoughts, no reactions, just silence. A deafening stillness that wrapped around my body like a vacuum. My knees buckled a little, but I caught myself on the edge of the kitchen counter. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was humiliation. It was betrayal in its rawest form. Not just a person leaving, but leaving with strategy, with backup, with someone waiting in the wings. That same afternoon, I confirmed what I already knew deep down. She wasn't just leaving me. She was moving in with Danner. I found a tenant agreement filed under the property management portal I'd never used. She'd created her own login. The new lease was under Claire's name. Danner was listed as the landlord and co-resident. That's right. She was dating him now, living with him, sleeping with him. The man who used to come by and compliment the work I did on the porch. The man who barely looked me in the eye when I signed the rent checks. He'd been circling quietly, like a hawk watching its moment. There were no text messages between them on her phone, no emails I could find. She'd covered her tracks. Maybe she'd been using encrypted apps, or maybe she deleted everything before she left. Either way, it didn't matter. The outcome was the same. In less than 48 hours, Claire had erased our life together. And what gutted me the most wasn't even the relationship. It was the ease of it, the calculation, the quiet dismissal of everything we'd shared, like I was a project she'd completed, a phase she'd outgrown. I sat alone that night in my townhouse, listening to the hum of the fridge and the creak of the old floorboards, and I realized something I hadn't before. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of passion gone wrong. It was a decision. Claire had chosen to leave me, to betray me, to weaponize the life we built together and use it to slide into something newer, more exciting, I guess. And somehow, the man holding open the door for her was the one I'd been paying rent to for 5 years. But that wasn't the end of The story. Not even close. Revenge wasn't the first thing on my mind. Not at first. In the days that followed Claire's departure, I didn't sleep much. I ate even less. I wasn't angry, just hollow. Like someone had hit the kill switch inside. Me, and I was moving through the world on autopilot. But grief is strange. It mutates. At some point, the numbness gave way to clarity. I wasn't just heartbroken. I had been played. Used. And the person who'd done it walked away with my dignity while my landlord helped hold the door open. That's when something in me shifted. Not emotionally, but logically. I wasn't going to scream or beg or stoop to anything dramatic. I work in cybersecurity. My entire job is about tracking patterns, detecting breaches, isolating threats. And suddenly I realized I wasn't powerless. I'd just been looking at the wrong system. So I started phase 1. Intelligence. I dug deep into everything I legally had access to. I wasn't going to hack Claire's or Danner's accounts. That wasn't the plan. But as a tenant, I'd had years of emails, documents, maintenance receipts, and even digital payment histories. I started combing through them with a forensic mindset. There were inconsistencies in the lease records. Danner had been charging us maintenance surcharges that never corresponded with actual repairs. He was skimming. Not a ton, but enough to raise a red flag if someone knew where to look. Then I went to public records. Danner owned 3 other rental properties in the county, all under a single LLC. I pulled their tax records, business filings, and mortgage histories. 2 of the homes were delinquent on property taxes. 1 was under review for zoning violations. None of this was illegal, but it was sloppy. And if you know anything about county databases, you know they don't hide mistakes well. Next came phase 2, documentation. I started a log. Dates, amounts, document scans, photos of lease agreements, everything I could legally gather. I also installed a basic security camera at the side of my house that captured the driveway, and more importantly, recorded the dates Danner had been visiting prior to Claire's departure. The footage proved he'd been there outside of agreed maintenance hours more than a dozen times. There was no tenant request logged during those visits. I wasn't the only one who would find that interesting. With all that compiled, I made my move. Phase 3. Reporting. First, I filed a formal complaint with the city's housing authority, including all discrepancies in billing, lease violations, and unauthorized visits. Next, I reported the tax issues, publicly available records, to the county auditor's office. Not to cause trouble, but because I knew they were already under pressure from state-level compliance. Danner's sloppy bookkeeping just handed them something actionable. But I wasn't done. I sent a copy of my full documentation, about 23 pages of organized, timestamped data, to his insurance provider. Rental property insurance policies often have strict clauses regarding zoning, tax status, and lease legitimacy. Violations like unauthorized subletting or romantic involvement with tenants while using shared residence space can void entire policies. Then came the personal blow. Claire had used my name on a couple of shared utilities. Legally, she couldn't just cancel or transfer those accounts without my consent. So I called each one, had them reissued in my name only, and scheduled disconnection, dates for the service address she'd moved to. She tried calling me after that twice. I let it go to voicemail both times. The final strike came from something she'd forgotten about entirely. The porch. Remember that porch Claire and I had rebuilt together? Well, turns out we paid for every repair, every upgrade. And I had every invoice. According to rental law in our state, if a tenant invests in permanent improvements with the landlord's consent, even verbal, it counts as a tenant lien. I filed a small claim suit against Danner's LLC for $3,488, backed by receipts, screenshots, and before and after inspection photos. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle, about reminding them that I wasn't just a discarded bystander. Weeks passed. Danner's name popped up in a county record update. His insurance status had shifted to under review. His property management license was flagged for audit. The housing authority reached out to verify my documentation. Meanwhile, Claire and Danner were suddenly very quiet. I never heard from either of them directly again, not even a text, but I saw the fallout. The house they moved into? It went up for sale 3 months later. Quiet listing, quick turnaround, probably cashing out before the audit hit full swing. Word from a neighbor who I'd stayed friendly with was that Claire had moved again, this time alone. I never smiled about it. Not exactly, but I slept better. That whole ordeal taught me something important. Control isn't about volume. It's not about confrontation or making a scene. It's about holding the facts, knowing your options, and waiting for the right time to act. I didn't need revenge to feel powerful. I just needed to reclaim the one thing they tried to take from me, my peace. And just when you think this story is over, there's one more thing. 3 weeks after the fallout, I received an anonymous envelope. No return address. Inside, a single piece of paper, Claire's lease termination confirmation. Typed, signed. Dated the exact day after our small claims hearing. I read it once. Then I folded it, placed it in a drawer, and walked outside into the cool evening air. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need revenge to scream. I had the one thing they'd never expect me to keep: my silence. In the months that followed, life didn't suddenly get better. It just got quieter. And honestly, that was enough. I stayed in the townhouse. It felt like mine now, more than it ever had while Claire was in it. I repainted the bedroom, donated the furniture she'd picked out, and even replaced the curtain she loved but never washed. Bit by bit, I reclaimed the space, not out of spite, but out of necessity. It's strange how healing sometimes happens in the smallest acts. Choosing a different brand of coffee, rearranging your bookshelf, or finally tossing out that chipped mug she insisted on keeping. Danner's properties went under review, and, though I never dug into the full details, I heard from a city contact that his license was suspended pending investigation. One of his tenants reached out to me, someone I didn't know personally but who'd seen my name in a filing. She'd been bullied into accepting an illegal rent hike. After hearing what I'd reported, she took her case to the housing board. They ruled in her favor. He'd been doing this for years. Quiet exploitation hidden behind friendly smiles and small-town charm. Turns out my story wasn't the first. It was just the first to be documented well enough to stick. Claire vanished from my radar. No social media updates, no random emails. I don't know where she is now, and I've stopped wondering. There's a kind of peace that comes with letting someone disappear without needing closure. Some people aren't chapters in your story, they're footnotes. Lessons. The real change didn't happen outside. It happened internally. For a while, I kept asking myself what I missed, what I could have done differently. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized the betrayal wasn't about me lacking something. It was about her searching for something in herself that I was never responsible for. And once I stopped personalizing her choices, I stopped bleeding from the wounds she left behind. I didn't fall into another relationship, and I didn't rush to fill the space. I started running again, something I hadn't done since college. I read more, cooked more, reconnected with people I hadn't spoken to in years. I invested time in myself the way I used to invest in saving what we had. And honestly, that was the truest revenge, living a better life without bitterness. One evening, I got a text from a coworker. He'd just rented a place nearby and mentioned that his new landlord seemed a bit too hands-on. The name on the lease? Someone connected to Danner's old company. I sent him a list of questions to ask, nothing more. Just enough for him to protect himself. Sometimes your story saves people you'll never meet. There's a quote I keep written on a sticky note next to my monitor. It says, "Peace isn't quiet, it's earned." I believe that now more than ever. Because the truth is, I didn't just outsmart the people who betrayed me, I outgrew them. And as for Claire, well, she said I'd never find better than her. She was wrong.